And to know more about those or to learn more about them, you can go to my website, which is right here, beyond2llc.com. But meanwhile, let me talk to you a little bit about each personality style. The popular sanguine is a fun loving, gregarious, engaging personality style. They have more friends than they can count. Nobody is a stranger to that personality style. Some of the challenges with that personality style is that and I am that personality style. We're flighty, we're forgetful, we're usually not on time. And we are talkative. We talk sometimes way too much. Then you have the powerful choleric. The powerful choleric is a mover and a shaker. They can run just about anything they put their minds to, right? They're born leaders from when they were children. You see the little born leaders in them. They're always trying to tell you what to do, how to do it, where to do it, and when to do it. And some of their challenges are that they're bossy and controlling, and they're curt and abrasive in how they communicate. So those are your extroverts. Let's talk about your introverts. Your perfect melancholy is a deep thinker. They're highly intelligent. They're the personality that is very compassionate. They care about not only their own group or family or friends, but the world at large. But some of their challenges are that they're moody and they are critical and judgmental. And then finally, you have your fourth and final personality style, which is your last introverted personality style. And that's the peaceful phlegmatic. The peaceful phlegmatic is cool, calm, collected. They're chill. They're a personality that I believe every family and every organization needs because they're so calming, and they're loyal and they're dependable. But they are also disinterested and uninvolved. And they can also be, they have dry sense of humor, and they could be a little sarcastic. So that's just a brief overview of the four personalities. And so my show talks about those things so we can build healthier, stronger relationships by understanding each other. So tonight's show, we're going to talk about embracing loss, how personalities navigate grief through the holidays and beyond. And I have a special guest with me tonight, and I'm so excited to be able to introduce her. Give me a quick second here. My guest is Chanel McCord. She's a mental health speaker, a therapist, an author, a wellness coach. Chanel is an award-winning therapist and mental health advocate with 10 plus years in the mental health field. Chanel specializes in working with minority communities, professionals, and entrepreneurs who are ready to embrace their mental health and wellness. She is a well sought after mental health speaker and has presented for numerous organizations, including the National Alliance on Mental Health, New Jersey, the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights, Seton Hall University, the New Jersey Courts, and a host of churches and local organizations. She is passionate about spreading mental health awareness, breaking stigma, normalizing therapy, and helping people to embrace their humanity. Welcome to Personality Speaking, Chanel.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
I'm excited that you are here, and I'm excited for a number of reasons. Just before I came on the show tonight, I had somebody send me a message and said, I hope that this is going to be a very important topic, especially around loss and during the holiday season, with so many people struggle during the holidays when they're missing their loved ones. But the person said to me, well, you're going to talk about other losses, like losses in the work, when you lose your job, or you broke up with somebody before the holidays, or the loss of expectation in a relationship. I said, yeah, we can talk about all those things because loss is really loss, right?
It's loss is loss. And it processes emotionally and mentally in the same way, no matter what the loss is.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important for people to understand that we can get through what we're going through. I have recently been processing so much loss that it's just been overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
And so I had a friend to say, you need to do a show on that. You need to, and I agree with her because I've done a show on this when I had my radio podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I did a show on grief and how to overcome grief. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a very important topic. I lost a friend last year, she was my sister girlfriend,
Mm.
and she passed away suddenly. She found out that she was diagnosed with cancer in October, and she died 6 weeks later.
Mm.
And so it was so quick, and it was so aggressive and so painful for all that loved her.
So sorry to hear.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then a few months later, my niece by marriage passed away from breast cancer. So it's two breast cancers. I had three
Yeah.
friends who had breast cancer and had survived breast cancer, all in the same year.
Mm-hmm.
And then last week, a friend that I had just became friends with in April, but we developed a really strong, close sisterhood, passed away suddenly last Friday. So
Wow.
that's a whole lot of
Wow.
grief to
Wow.
process.
Wow. That's a lot at one time. And I think, that's the thing about grief, right? It's overwhelming, right? Because when you're going through grief, especially in the beginning stages of it, your mind is trying to make sense. Like you're trying to make sense of what's happening, right? You're
Mhm.
trying to make sense of the reality that this person or this thing is no longer a part of my reality. So
Right.
whether you lost a person or whether you lost a job, or like you said, or the loss of expectations, whatever it is, we have to come to terms that this thing is no longer a part of my reality. And as humans, that's really hard because our reality is our comfort, right? We get comfortable in our reality. So when something happens to pluck something out of our reality, it shifts, especially when that pluck comes and we didn't ask for it. Right. Especially
Right.
when it comes and I didn't have any control over it, because it takes away a sense of our control too. And so now it's like we're trying to get our equilibrium and we're trying to get back to recognize like, oh, this is really my reality. And the brain has a hard time processing that, as well as our emotions.
Wow, that's powerful. And I tell you it's powerful for a number of reasons. I love being a personality trainer because I look at all the different personalities and how they view different topics,
Mm-hmm.
and how they view grief is the topic we're talking about tonight. And when
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about not having control, the powerful choleric, their basic desire is to have control.
Mm.
So for a powerful choleric, when they have the difficulty of something being stripped from them, like you said,
Right.
a job, a
Right.
person, a relationship, a reality, whatever it is, they struggle in that because they don't have that level of control, and they can very easily fall into depression because
Mm-hmm.
they don't have control.
Control.
What most people don't realize is we don't have control over anything.
Right.
We
That
think
is
we do.
that is the reality, but our perceived control that we have, the little bit that we can hold on to when we feel like I'm in control of my life, or I'm in control of my destiny, or I can make things happen. When that gets plucked away, it sends you into an emotional and mental whirlwind. Like it really does. Even though, like you said, if we really sat in and processed that I have no control over this life, right? Like
Right.
I even my own body, like when we talk about sicknesses and different things like that, when I'm working with clients who have like terminal sicknesses, or they have like chronic sicknesses, one of the things that we have to come to terms with is I feel betrayed by my body, but recognizing that I really have no control over what happens. I can only do the best that I can to make sure I take care of the body that I have, right? And so
Yes.
there's like this reality shift, there's this mental shift that has to come into play when we talk about control. But the reality of the matter is the human cycle is all about control. What can
Yeah.
I control? How much can I control? And all of that. And the moment that control is being taken away from me, whether it's I lost my job, I lost a partner, someone left this life and went on to the next, whatever it is, when that gets plucked away, it just completely throws us off. And then we have to do our work to get back to a baseline. And
Yeah.
that depends on different people. Like you said, I know you do, like as a personality trainer, it can depends on personality. It depends on trauma, how you
Mm.
process, your ability to cope, all of it. And so there is no, when it comes to grief, there's no timeline. And I think that's what people struggle with. Like there's no real
Yeah.
timeline. Like we have something that we call like complicated grief. And so after like a year or two, if you are still in that place where it's just like you still, it's very fresh and it hasn't never left and you're having the same symptoms, then we would say that is complicated grief. But the reality is, especially when we're talking about the loss of a loved one, when someone passes on, there's no timeline. There's no
Yeah.
timeline for anyone because there's so many factors in working through that loss.
I think that's great for you to share that, because I think sometimes it's the pressure we place on ourselves
Right.
that we should be feeling better. I mean, I've had people say to me that, okay, I know how you deal with grief, so you just need to move on. And you can't tell a person how to process their pain.
You
They
can't.
have to be able to do it themselves. Let me
You're
just ask you
absolutely right.
this. So,
Hmm.
as it relates to grief during the holiday season,
Hmm.
um, do you think it's different than any other time? Like if I had somebody that maybe died earlier in the year versus somebody died right before the holidays, or how do I see a death or a loss?
Hmm.
Do I see it differently during the holidays than I would any other time of year?
Mm. I think so, right? And I want to kind of redefine holidays for us, right? Because really what we're talking about when we're talking about holidays, we're talking about these personal times of celebration, right? And
Mhm.
so I think it's more apparent during what we would Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year is the holiday time, right? But
Right.
when we're talking about the loss of a loved one, right? When we're talking about the loss of a friend, someone who has passed on, we have to think about personal holidays. It's the same when birthdays come up, right?
Yeah.
It's the same when anniversaries come around.
Right.
And so I think sometimes what happens is we only define things according to the holidays that we see,
Yeah.
that we see as holidays or that people define as the holiday time. But when the truth of the matter is, any time of personal celebration are the times that we're going to feel it, especially when it's the first, right? The
Yes.
first, we have a thing in the mental health world where we call it the first. And when my
Yep.
clients lose somebody, we're always prepping for your the first birthday that you're going to spend for yourself and that person is not around, when that person's birthday comes up, when
That's
the
right.
death date comes up, when
The first
Valentine's Day
Tuesday, the
will come
first
up.
Valentine's Day, right? The
Exactly,
first
all of
Mother's
that.
Day, the first
Exactly,
Father's Day.
all of that,
Yeah.
these personal times of celebration. And so yeah, often those times we feel it the most because those are the times where we tap into it's kind of a sad reality of humanity, but I'll talk about that later. It's during these holiday times that we actually tap into relationship, right? Where we
Mhm.
actually spend time to reflect on how much this relationship meant, or I'm used to
Mhm.
the big old family gatherings or whatever, and now
Mhm.
this person is not going to be here, right? The reason why I say that's a sad reality of humanity is because we should be doing more of that outside of the holidays, but
Yeah.
it is during the holiday time when we actually lean into that, right? And so yes, it really does hit different when these times come around, because stuff like remembering some of the losses I had in my life, right? Thinking
Mhm.
about when I'm Christmas shopping, I'm
Mhm.
getting for this one, that one, and then you're
Right.
stopped in your tracks in the store and you're like, wait a minute, they're no longer
Right.
here with us. I'm not buying a
Right.
Christmas gift for them, or I'm not going to get that text message, or I'm not going to get that phone call for them, or whatever the case is. And so the holidays, yes, we talk about Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year, but I always like to remind people that the holidays are so much bigger than that. And so, yes, we usually have those conversations around this time of year, but let's look at the holidays in the first of all year long, because there's something that's going to come up all year long, and different
Yeah.
things mean different things to people, right? St.
Right.
Patrick's may not be something that is a holiday that me and my family celebrate, but for somebody that's huge for another family. So when
Right.
St. Patrick's Day comes around, that's a big deal. So we got to look at holidays, but also understand that these first, when I have to navigate the first of anything without that loved one there, it's going to be difficult. And so what I usually tell my clients is you have to go as fast or as slow as you need to go.
Love it. I love it because what I recognize is for the different personalities, for the sanguine personality, that is a fun-loving
Mm-hmm.
personality, when we experience grief, we have to get through it so that we can get to our happy place again. Because we
Mm-hmm.
our desire is to always be happy and living life to the fullest and having fun. And so whatever we have to do to process it quickly and
Mm-hmm.
get through it, that's what we need to do, right?
Yeah.
For the
Yeah.
colic personality, they have to get involved. They need to do stuff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that means if they're planning the event, like the repast, or
Right.
they're planning the memorial service or whatever, they have to planning to get a new job, looking
Yes.
for a new spouse, whatever they have to do to move through it, they're going to do something, right?
Right.
For the melancholy personality, the melancholy person is more self-reflective, so they
Mm.
need to get inside and figure out what went wrong and how could I, what could I've done differently, or how could I've been there, or whatever
Right.
they need to
Right.
do. And for the peaceful phlegmatic, that phlegmatic personality needs to get to a very calm and peaceful place
Mm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that they're able to process. So each of the
Mm-hmm.
personalities process their grief differently, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about coping. Are
Yes.
there any strategies that, because one, I think you kind of touched upon one
Mm-hmm.
strategy of how people can, process their grief and move to the, next phase
Mm-hmm.
um, through the grief. I think you touched upon one when you talked about go as fast or as slow as you need to,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other ways that people can cope with, grief in this time?
Yeah, and as you talk about personality, ways in which people can cope. I'm not one of those therapists where, it's just like just do the breathing exercises or just do, because it really is dependent on the person, right? It
Right.
really is dependent on your reality and what it is and what you find is calming for you, what you find is joyful for you. Like, a lot of therapists will encourage journaling, and I encourage journaling too, to a certain point, but I hate writing, right? I would rather type. So if you tell me to journal, or if I try to journal to cope, I'm gonna be so frustrated, and I guess I'm not coping because I'm not sitting here writing, right? So I really think this is where self-awareness comes in, and this is where people have to really tap in and know for thyself, what are those things that are common for me? Is it going to the gym? Like, I noticed for me, when I'm stressed out, there's nothing like getting in the gym and throwing some weights around and doing some deadlifts and stuff like that. For me, the gym is more about mental health than it
Right.
is, anything else, or whatever the case is. So this is where I encourage people. You really have to tap into self and know thyself. Like, you really
Yes.
have to tap in to figure out, is it calming music? Is it, going for massages? Is it having conversations with close, trusted, and safe people in your life, right? Anything can be a coping mechanism depending on who you are. Like, there aren't, yes, we have some specifics. Like, if you're dealing with anxiety, breathing does work. But when it comes to grief, I really stick with the go as fast or as slow as you need to do, because that really goes with coping. Like, I have clients who I'm dealing with, like I was telling you right before we started the show, this is a difficult time, and when they're dealing with loss and navigating loss. And for some people, it's just like, oh, Christmas is coming, so I gotta get up, I gotta cook, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, you don't. You don't have to go to the family gathering. You
Yeah.
don't have to cook. You don't have to hold. You don't have to do any of that. You go as fast or slow as you need to do, not feeling like you need to stand up and rise to somebody else's tradition, or stand up to a tradition that is not working for you in this time of the season. And so if you wake up today, and I tell my clients that all the time, if you wake up on Christmas morning, or you wake up on your birthday and you're not feeling it, turn back over and go to sleep. And
Right.
guess what?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. And it's interesting because for me, I know that I need to process. I need to go through my crying period,
Mhm.
because I cried for days after this last
Mhm.
incident, and I've cried for months after my girlfriend passed away too. But I cried for days straight, like nonstop.
Mhm.
I couldn't sleep or anything like that. And I was wondering, because people do think that you should be able to just deal with it and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to strike a balance between honoring the grief or the grief process
Mm-hmm.
and participating in holiday stuff? Like you were saying, you don't have to
Mm-hmm.
go, you don't have to whatever. But for me, I think I feel better when I'm around people.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a delicate balance? Because I also feel some level of guilt that I'm laughing and having fun
Mm-hmm.
when I just lost somebody.
Exactly. And that's a normal feeling for most people, feeling guilty. And I think the balance comes in knowing yourself, right? Because like you're saying, I know I feel better when I'm around people. It helps me to get going. Perhaps it helps me to take my mind off of it. And it helps me to allow myself to throw myself into the joy of the occasion as opposed to just sitting home and sulking. But for another person, being around all of those people may be way too much, and
Right.
I need to be by myself. I need to sit back. And for other people, maybe it's just one or two key people I need to be around, and not a whole crowd. And so there is a balance. Again, it goes back to that balance comes in knowing yourself. Like, this is why self-awareness is so huge, and knowing what works for you, and whatever works for you is fine, right? And like you said, or the balance is, okay, maybe I can't host it. I host at my house every year. I'm willing to do the family thing, but you know what, Auntie so-and-so, you do it at your house this year. I can't host it this year because that would be too much to bring that to my home, right? Or maybe it's, I'll host it, but I don't want to do none of the cooking. So, or whatever. So I think when you tap into self-awareness and trying to figure out, okay, what is it that I need? What is going to help me? But I also think it depends on where you are in the process, right? Grief is not necessarily a linear process. Like, you don't go from this stage to this stage to this stage to this stage and then, oh, I'm out of grief. Grief doesn't work like that. It's more of a cyclical process. It can start over. You can start at different points in the process, or whatever the case is. You may not even hit all the different stages, right? Depending on who you are and what your process is. But I think that when you are grieving, the best thing you need to do is to acknowledge it. And one of the things that most people do is ignore the grief. Like, I want to ignore it. I want to forget that I had that loss. I want to forget that my reality has changed. I want to act like it didn't happen. And I just want to move on. The problem with that is that grief is going to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Grief is one of those things, or you're going to deal with me. Like that, like, it is what it is. Like, you're going to deal with me. Either I can deal with it in my semblance of control by allowing myself to process it, or I'm going to allow it to deal with me.
Right.
And for most people, we're allowing grief to deal with us because we're trying to ignore, or we're trying to forget the fact that we are grieving. When I don't ignore it, when I don't allow myself to forget the fact that I'm grieving, what it is, going back to that control thing, I give myself a semblance of control. So I have a little bit more control over how I go through this process, because it's going to happen either way. It can either happen today, or it can happen 5 years down the line.
Yeah. I always say, pay me now. I always say, pay me now, pay me later. Right? It's like, what you don't deal with will deal with you, right?
Yes, it will.
And that is so true. And I think that I was thinking about how we can help each other. I went through, when my mom passed away, I struggled. I didn't even know I was grieving. And I didn't realize, I knew I was grieving initially.
Right.
But I didn't know that the grief was still happening for a period of time. Because I love people and I love being around people. I get my energy from people, and people would call me. And you know how at the time, the service that I had, the internet service I had, when my phone rang, it showed up on my television and told me who was calling. And I would just look at the television and roll my eyes like, I don't want to talk to anybody, and that was not me. And I remember talking to my girlfriend, and somebody would, beep in on the other line, and I said, I don't feel like talking. Or I would say, somebody said they want to come on, I don't feel like company. And she said, I told your husband that I needed him to really, watch over you. And I said, why'd you do that? And she said, I think you're depressed. And I said, well, why do you think I'm depressed? She said, because you don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to be around people. And that's not your personality.
Mhm.
And she was right. And that really shook me
Mhm.
into seeking help. So I went to group therapy at our church. And one thing I learned was everybody's grief is different, and how we process grief is
Mhm.
different. And we should
Yeah.
not tell other people how to process grief. So I was
Mhm.
going to ask you, how do you handle, or how do you deal with your friends and your family? How can your friends and family better support you as you're
Mhm.
going through the grief process?
Right, right. You know, I think this is where the responsibility becomes on you to communicate what you need. And that can be hard for the grieving person. But what happens is friends and family are like they're willing, right? But they're often stumbling because nobody knows what you want and nobody can read your mind. And so this is where you have to communicate, this is what I need. This is where you have to communicate, hey, call me every Wednesday just to check on me one time. And if I know that you're calling on Wednesday, I'll answer. And that'll be my day. Or hey, I really don't feel like cooking. Can you, provide a meal or whatever the case is? But you have to be able to communicate your needs, because
Yeah,
what happens is when you're grieving, especially when it's fresh, there's almost this expectation that people just know. They'll just know what I need. And if they're not saying the right things or they're not doing the right things, people don't know. And they
that's
want to
right.
help. They want to be there to support you. And sometimes as a grieving person, you'll push everybody away, and people will step away because they're trying to respect you, right? They're trying to respect that you want this space, but then you feel unsupported. And
Yeah,
so it can be very difficult for the grieving person to communicate what it is that I need, but you have to communicate. You have to communicate and let people know what you need and what you do not need. It's
yeah,
okay to say, hey, I don't want any company right now. I'll
right.
call you next week and let you know, because what happens is we'll just ignore phone calls. We ignore the reach outs or whatever. And then eventually people just leave you alone because they'll say, oh, you don't want to be bothered. But here's the reality. The reality is one day is going to come where you're going to want to be bothered. Right?
Right,
You're
right.
going to want that measure of support, and you need support, especially when you have a support system that is willing, that loves you, and that wants to dote on you. You have to be able to communicate your needs and what it is that you do need and what you do not need. And that is absolutely okay.
So I keep hearing you say a common theme here, which is you have to know what you want. You have to be able to communicate what you want. But being in the personality field, right, where I
Mm-hmm.
teach personalities all the time, I recognize that there are a lot of people who have no idea what they want.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea what they want. They're very they have a poor way of communicating their needs to
Yes.
other people. They don't know how to communicate. Matter
Mm-hmm.
of fact, I have a family member. Just yesterday I was with them, and they needed help, but they
Mm-hmm.
refused to ask for help. And when I offered to help, no, 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 I can do it myself. Well, if you could do it yourself, why am I here?
Right.
So I know that there are people who, and that
Yeah.
that personality is a choleric personality. I can do it myself. As long as I can do it myself, I'll do it for as long as I can, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just know that there are personalities that struggle with understanding who they are. Because when I give them a personality assessment, the personality assessment comes back all skewed. And I
Mm-hmm.
say, because you don't know who you
You
are,
don't
right?
know. You
So
don't know.
how do you manage somebody when they're going through a grieving process? How do you manage a person who does not even have an idea who they are, or what they want, or what they need? How
Mm-hmm.
do you deal with that?
So this is a whole mouthful, because oftentimes people's introduction into mental health is grief.
Oh, wow.
Oftentimes people's introduction into mental health is grief, because when you're in a period of grieving and you need to be able to communicate what you want and you need to be able to know yourself and all of these things, you start to realize that you don't have the tools and you don't have the skills to do it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, yes, on one hand, you got to be able to communicate what you need. But if they don't know how to communicate what they need, then we're kind of stuck in this whirlwind. And now it's just like, okay, what do we do? And that's why self-awareness, and this is why this is the importance as people, that we're always working on ourselves to build that level of self-awareness, right? That we're
Right.
working through traumas, we're working through hurts and pains, because then when you have something like grief that pops up, where now you're going to have to pull on all the skills that you should have, now you don't have them. And it's just like, okay, here we are. Now, what do I do? Now I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. So now I'm in this process of grief, and I'm having to learn to be self-aware, and I'm having to learn to communicate, because the
Right.
bottom line is, whether you're grieving or not, people don't know how to help you unless you communicate what you need and what you want. Like,
That's right.
we do the basic things, like, okay, you lose somebody, we may try to give you some financial help, somebody may try to clean your house, somebody may give you groceries, but I may not need that. I may not need that. What I need is you to pick up my kids and make sure my kids get to and from school, because I can't. Like, I can't. You know what I'm saying? But I have to be able to communicate that. And then what
Right.
happens is, lack of being able to communicate causes confusion, causes frustration. And now we're just on this cycle, because then now what happens is, now I'm like, nobody's actually tending to me. Nobody's giving me what I need. And these are the narratives that we create in our heads for ourselves. When the truth of the matter is, people are throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that something sticks, because they're just trying to be there for you. So
Wow.
there's no way of getting around the need for communication. But this is why we need to be lifetime learners of ourselves and continuously working on ourselves, so that
Yes,
we're
sir.
developing the skills beyond the grief, beyond whatever the situation is. So when I find myself in a situation where I have to pull up on all those skills, they're already there, and I'm not trying to pull from an empty well.
Whoo, girl.
Yeah.
You said it was a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
Mhm.
It is. It is. And that's why I teach what I teach, and why I love what I do, is because it does help people to become not only self-aware, but
Mhm.
aware of other people and how they operate, right?
Yep.
So you first learn yourself and understand how you operate and why you
Right.
do the things you do and why you say the things you say. Then you learn what other people,
Mhm.
how other people operate, and
Mhm.
that's how you are able to, really build strong relationships with people. It's just through understanding. I think all conflict starts with a misunderstanding,
Yes, it
right?
does.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this.
Mhm.
We talked about the first, because I remember saying that to my friend's husband, is that the whole year, the first year of first
Mhm.
is the hardest, right? It's
Yeah.
hard losing somebody you love. It's hard losing a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a child. It's hard losing them.
Mhm.
But that first year is the first year first, right? Like
Mhm.
you said, birthdays, Valentine's days, Easter's, Thanksgivings, whatever,
Mhm.
St. Patrick days, whatever. But how do you start to really rebuild by creating other rituals or other, because I've been with my husband 29 years. God
Mhm.
forbid anything were to happen to him. But we have our thing.
Mhm.
We're in sync with each other.
Mhm.
So once that gets broken apart,
Mhm.
how do you now start to build a whole new norm?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that again looks different for everybody. One of the things that I encourage my clients to do, once you get to a certain place, I don't think you do this right out the gate, but once you get to a certain place where you feel like you have embraced like, I've accepted the reality of the fact that this person is gone or this thing is gone, then you have to figure out, okay, what are the things around me that I can slowly start to shift, because I do have to create a new reality. For
Right.
some people, that may be, okay, is it getting rid of things in a home? Is that, okay, I used to always go to this restaurant with my spouse, if it's a spouse that you love, let me try something different, right? You have to begin to start to move in. And I don't think you go hard and fast, right? The first thing you don't do is go to the closet and donate all the clothes. That may, like, you have to know, okay, what are the small things that I can do so that I can slowly but surely start to recreate this life for myself and recreate this reality. And a lot of times it does start in the home. A lot of times it will start with, okay, if I'm hanging out, or it's Friday night. Friday night is date night. Well, maybe I don't have my husband necessarily to go on date night with, but I can create a new norm of, but I'm still going to take myself out. I'm going to go to the movies. I'm going to take myself out to dinner. I
Yeah.
think it's the small things that we have to start to move into to, again, it's a recreation of reality. And the closer that person was to you, the more of a reality you have to recreate. When we're talking about a spouse, you're talking about your home, you're talking about finances, you're talking about cars, like there's a whole lot of things that have to be recreated or not. For some people, they may decide, you know what, I want to keep the home exactly the same because
Yeah.
that's going to help me go through this process, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's starting to take more steps, and that's usually when you get to a point where you wake up and you wake up one day and you're just like, okay, yes, I know this person is gone, because
Wow.
it takes time to get to that point, right? Like
That's so
when
true.
you first lose a person, it's like you'll wake up and for a minute everything will feel normal, and then like you'll go to pick up the phone, right? Like, oh, let me call so and so, and you're like, wait, I can't call so and so. But I
Yeah.
think when you get to the place where, okay, I woke up and the reality of working up is I know this person is not here, but I can still get out the bed. I can still go to work. I can still do what I have to do. And so I think at some point you have to intentionally, there's an intentionality behind it. You have
Yeah.
to intentionally decide, okay, memorialize. I always teach my clients, find a way to memorialize the loved one that has passed on, memorialize and begin to work to do what you have to do to try to, I don't want to say move on, but move forward to
Yeah.
recreate a new reality. It's like with COVID, right? COVID was nothing but one big cycle of grief and loss. That's what it was.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when we came out of COVID, we kept talking about the new normal, the new normal. We had to create a new reality for ourselves. We
True.
had to create a new normal for ourselves. It's the same thing with loss. It's like, okay, now I got to wear masks, or now, you know, I got to stay 6 feet away from people, or whatever the case is. We had to create a new normal, a new
Yeah.
reality. It's the same kind of process. I have to figure out what does that look like for me and what's going to help me, right? And I
Right.
think some of the things, I feel like I just feel led to say this. For some people, in creating that new normal and that new reality, you have to figure out what you want your next to be.
Wow. Wow.
Figuring out what you want your next to be is key and pivotal. If I'm
Right.
talking to a spouse, are you still, or do you want companionship? Do you plan on seeking companionship in another relationship? Figuring out what your next is and what you want your next to be is going to help you to create those rituals, as you say. If I
Yeah.
know I want companionship, if I know that my spouse has gone, but I want to invite companionship back into my life, then I may have to change some stuff around about my house. I may have to, or whatever the case is. And so if I'm inviting new love into my life, I have made space and room for it.
Mm. Woo.
Yeah.
That's a biggie. That's a biggie.
Mhm.
And I think that what happens when you, especially when you lose somebody, determining when you start to create that space for love or for
Mhm.
anything that's different, right?
Mhm.
Because it may not even be the love of an individual that you want to spend your life with. It may or may not be that. It could just be, do I stay in this house?
Mm.
Right?
Mhm.
Do I stay in this state?
Mhm.
Do I move somewhere else?
Exactly.
Those things, do I still have the same group of friends? Because maybe all my friends were her friends or his friends.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that, to me, to determine something like that, there is a bit of guilt that I think attaches itself to it,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that is, am I doing it too fast?
Mm.
Right? Does it dishonor my spouse, friend, whatever, if I, move on,
Mhm. Mhm.
seemingly move on without, as if nothing has happened? And how
Mm.
quickly do I do that? You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
people will say, well, wow, 6 months later and you're dating, and
Mhm.
so there's some guilt, I think, that attaches itself to
Yeah.
moving forward in your life. What,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely. And I think so, and when it comes to like a situation like that, like if we're talking about a spouse, and I think these are the conversations that you have with your spouse. You know how we do, we plan, we have life insurance and we plan for, when one passes on or whatever. Do we have these kind of conversations? And it's uncomfortable conversation, but do
Yeah.
we have these kind of conversations? Like, is there an expectation of my spouse that God forbid something happens for them that no, I'm going to stay single and I'm not going to move on. Like,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes if I have a conversation with my spouse and they're just like, no, I want you to live happy. I want you to find love. I don't want you to live lonely. Then if I
Yeah.
have that conversation, that frees me up. God forbid that they pass on, to know that their desire for me was to live this life of happiness. You know
Yeah,
what
I
I'm
love that. Yeah, I love that. Except I would haunt my husband.
saying? I've told my husband the same thing, so no worries.
You will be haunted. I'm just
Yeah,
letting you
yeah.
know. You move on without me, you will still have me.
Right.
Every time you leave the
Right.
light on, I'm shutting it off.
You're
You'll
right.
know it's
That
me.
part. You're gonna know I'm here. Right.
So
And
how
it's
do
hard
people?
to think about, right? It's
Yeah, it
hard to
is.
think about, but it's real talk conversation, because
Yeah,
that things like that will help to lift some of the guilt. And I don't know that it will ever be a guilt-free situation. I don't know that that's possible, but the guilt is something that I can work through and work past.
yeah. So tell me how you deal with self-care as it relates to um grief or working through the grief process.
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of grief, as we already talked about,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's,
Mm-hmm.
you got fired at the end of the year, you know how people like to do that, to wait to the end of the year. They like to wait right before a holiday. They like to
Mm-hmm.
wait at the end of the day on a Friday. If you're gonna fire me on a Friday, fire me Friday morning at 8 a.m. Don't fire me
Exactly.
at 5 p.m.
Give
on
me
a
my
Friday.
whole weekend. Don't take a day of work from me. Right. Right. Right.
So how do people deal with self-care as it relates to processing grief?
Right. I think it's having the real definition of self-care. When we look at self-care, we look at it as spas, getting my hair done, getting my nails done, going out to dinner, the fun things, the relaxation things. And while those things are self-care, there's only one aspect of self-care. There are a whole lot of areas of our life that we have to tend to when we look at self-care. And so when I'm dealing with a loss, I have to look at what areas of my life are suffering and tend to that. If
Yeah.
is my is am I dealing with depression, is anxiety at an all-time high, then I should probably go to a therapist. That is considered self-care, right?
Mm.
Am I dealing with, am I noticing changes in my body? Am I not feeling well? Am I notice headaches and stuff going on? Then I should probably go to the doctor. That is self-care, right? Am I blowing my money? Am I not taking care of my finances? Or I had this loss, whether I had this job loss or the loss of a spouse. Now money looks different, right? That's a
Right.
part of our self-care. That maybe I need to look at a financial advisor or work on some budgeting, right? And so I really think it's us really understanding that self-care encompasses every area of our life and tending to what needs to be tended to in that moment. Yes, go get your hair done, go relax, go to the movies, have fun. But at the end of the day, once you do those things, you're still coming back to the bank account being overdrawn. You're
Yeah.
still coming back to the migraines. You're still coming back to like whatever the situation is. And so I think, again, going back to self-awareness, can't get away from it. It's knowing me enough that something is off, and that is the area I'm going to tend to. And so when I talk about self-care, understanding it's tending to all areas of my life and making sure I'm living a
Mm.
life of wellness that's well-rounded and not just targeted or me being able to relax.
Excellent. So let's talk about some professional support
Mm-hmm.
because, especially in our community, right? Um, we don't like to even talk about seeing a therapist or getting any kind of professional help
Mm-hmm.
because it's always been a stigma around mental health, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, what would you say to people, especially being a licensed clinical therapist?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to people about when they should consider therapy, when and if they should consider therapy, and what they should know about that?
Mm-hmm. hmm So my rule of thumb is, if you were human, you should consider therapy. That is my rule of thumb, because here's the reality. There's no person on this earth that's going to escape some kind of trauma, that you don't have goals in your life. I think it's us really understanding and redefining what mental health and tending to ourselves and therapy is, right? I have clients who have severe traumas, and they have, suicidal ideation, and they have clinical
Mm,
depression. And then I have clients who are working on some goals, and they're looking for some accountability, right?
mhm.
That I wouldn't put them in any specific mental health diagnosis, right? Then I have some clients is just like, I just don't have nobody to talk and process with. So I'm doing therapy. So I have that, right? And
Right.
so I think that there's been this idea of what therapy is and what it has to
Mm,
be, and that you have to be severely clinically whatever. There's a place for that. There's different places for that. And I think, and people understanding the different levels of care, like there are levels of care. That's why we have inpatient hospitals for people who have severe mental illnesses that may be a danger to themselves or danger to society. That's what inpatient care is, right? With my counseling center that I have, we are the lowest level of care. We're outpatient level of care. So I had a supervisor a long time ago that said this, and it always stuck with me. We deal with what we call the worried well. The worried well. That is the population that I deal with, right? And so if I have a client, I have some clients who have some severe things, but if it's beyond my scope, like if I'm like, oh no, they need intensive therapy or whatever, I'm going to refer them on to a higher level of care. But at this level of care, if you just want somebody to talk to, right, it's okay. And the thing I tell people all the time, therapy is not a lifetime sentence.
Yes.
Just as quick as you start it is as quick as you can end it.
Right.
I've held clients for as long as 3 years. I've held clients for as short as a week. Like it just really depends on the person and what it is that they need. And so I think that we really have to, again, get informed. We have to get
Yeah.
informed about what's out there. And I think what's happening is that people are misinformed, and people continue to pass on a narrative, an old misinformed narrative about what therapy is. And that's why conversations like this are important. That's why mental health awareness is so important to me, because I'm able to give a real picture of what this is, so that we can create a new narrative around therapy, and so that more people, especially in minority communities, are getting the help that they need.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so the last thing I'm gonna ask you, then I want to do a little bit of personality stuff.
Okay.
Um, as we, the people who are going through whatever grief they're going through, um, as we start to process the grief,
Mm-hmm.
how do we acknowledge where we were and where we've come from, to a
Mm-hmm.
better space? How do we recognize that? And
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of times what happens is we go through a difficult time, and we don't recognize that we're growing in that
Yes, yes,
process,
yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
how do we recognize that there's growth in the process that we're going through? We're not just sad and we stay sad, but we're processing that, what that grief looks like. And so, the next time something happens, it may not hit you the same way
Mm-hmm.
because you've been able to work through
Right,
the
right.
grief process.
Right. I think it's all about intentionality, and it's going back to allowing yourself that reflection time. There should never be a point in our lives where we're not reflecting, because as people, we're always growing and we're always evolving, right? And I know this is right around the time of the year where people like to stop and reflect. And how did I start off the year and where I'm at now? And it's actually a lot of the work that I'm doing with my clients now. It's like, okay, we're going into 2024. What are we working on? What do
Right.
you know that you've mastered for yourself? And what are some areas where you have to look back on and say to yourself, I still have some work to do in that area? And so I think that we should be in a constant process of reflection, of being able to look back and say, wow, this time last year, I was falling apart.
Right.
This time last year, I didn't recognize myself. I didn't want to be anybody, and now whatever, I like to look at, for me, it's always a process of in the moment, right? It's an in the
Mhm.
moment thing where I'll be, at a family gathering or something. And if something tragic happened a year ago, I'll just stop in a minute and I'm like, wow, I'm sitting here just enjoying time with my family in the middle of this family gathering. And this time last year, I didn't want to be around anybody. How
Yeah,
far we have come,
right.
and allowing ourselves to stop and to do that reflection. Now, reflection comes with, wow, how far I've come. And reflection also comes with, oh, I got some work to do. But it's
Yeah,
still good because it helps us, again, build that self awareness and know myself and know where I stand so that
yeah.
as I'm constantly growing and as I'm constantly evolving, I can do so authentically.
I love it. I love it. I want to do a little bit of what I used to call personality points to ponder. And so
Mm,
I want to talk a little bit. I want to share a little bit on the personalities as it relates to grief,
hmm
and how we can embrace the loss. The grief quote that I have is those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near. Still loved, still missed, and very dear. So I love that quote, and I wanted to kind of have that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the a challenge that each of the personalities have, and how
hmm
we can overcome some of those. So with the sanguine personalities, we're known to be outgoing and extroverted and optimistic. That's just how we were wired or are wired. But we may struggle with the need for solitude because we always want to be around people and we get our energy from people. But sometimes during the grieving process, we really need to take a step back and be by ourselves. And that's hard for
hmm
us to do.
hmm
We might find it challenging to balance our social needs with the quiet introspection often required during grief. And I have grown into that. Like I have not always been that person because that's my primary personality style. But
hmm
I have gotten to a place where sometimes I just need to be home crying, or being home, being quiet. So one of the things we can do to overcome is that as a sanguine personality, we can seek support through our social interactions, right? So when we have the time for personal reflection, then we can reach out to people who really support us and understand where we're coming from, and allow us to cry on their shoulders. But also that we can get out and do some things that will really help us.
mm
For us, if we are dancing, if we are doing something fun, it helps us with our endorphins, and we become the person that we were always, which is a happy
hmm
person.
hmm
So we find comfort that way, when we're dealing with other people. So that's just one of the ways we can do that.
hmm
You have any comments before I move on to the next?
No, no,
Okay.
this is good.
The choleric personality. They're characterized by their assertiveness, the fact that they're goal oriented. They face difficulties when confronted with emotional depth of grief. They don't like to experience the grief. They just want to process it, move on, go to the next.
hmm
Because their natural inclination is to take charge and to find a solution for whatever the issue is. So if it's, I lost a job, I'm finding a job. If the person
hmm
left me, well, hey, it won't be long before I find another. If
Right.
somebody passed away, let me help you do the stuff that needs to be done so I can process my grief that way, because that's how the cholerics approach grief.
hmm
They need goal-oriented, decisive things to do in order for them to be able to process the grief.
hmm
Okay. All right. So that's the choleric. The melancholy personality. The melancholy personality tends to be reflective and detail oriented. They
hmm
grapple with overthinking and a tendency to dwell on the details of loss. Like they're going to
hmm
go, I wish I could have been there. What could I have
hmm
done? How could I have stopped it? Why didn't I know? Those type of things, right? Um,
Right.
this introspective nature can sometimes intensify their feelings of sadness and make it more challenging for them to balance it or to get through it. Okay. How they can overcome it. The melancholy personality may engage in being introspective. That's good.
hmm
They can seek the meaning of their grief, but just be okay with the fact that you might not find a meaning, because everything doesn't have a meaning.
Right.
And they can express their emotions through creative ways, because most melancholies are creative in some way. They paint, they write poetry, they write music. They're usually very creative. So They just may journal, as you said before,
Mhm.
because they like to write. If you think about Oprah, is a melancholy, right?
Mhm.
And she wrote
Mhm.
a journal every day of her life. She had books and books of journals. So that's therapeutic for melancholy.
Yeah.
All right, fourth and final. The phlegmatic personality is known for being cool, calm, and collected, right? Having an easygoing demeanor. They may face challenge in being open and expressing their feelings and emotions during the grief process. You really don't know what a phlegmatic is thinking or how they're feeling because they really don't express it that well. Their desire for stability might also lead to internalizing their feelings instead of
Mm.
dealing with them head on, and they
Mhm.
may need some encouragement to share their experiences and their emotions with other people. Phlegmatic personalities might be able to rely on a support system by avoiding conflict during the grieving process, and we all know there can be some conflict
Mhm.
during grief.
Indeed. Yeah.
They need a safe place to land. And
Yeah.
that's what is needed for a phlegmatic personality. So I just kind of wanted to do a little something to
Mhm.
talk about the personalities and how they deal with grief and
Yeah.
how they process grief because we all look at it differently. We all process it differently.
Absolutely.
And I'm just so thankful. I know that this was a busy time for you. You did it on the last minute for me. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I know that people needed you and you popped on and you came through for me. So I really appreciate that. So can you
Absolutely.
tell people how they can get a hold of you and or if you have any resources, if you have books or anything that people might want to purchase?
Absolutely. So you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Oasis Wellness Group. My website is www.oasiswellnessgrp.org. I did write a book. It's called Jumpstart Your Journey to Mental Wellness: Strategies and Tools to Living Your Well Life. And it really is, the book is based on literal things that I do in session with clients. Even when I went through a rough time in my life, these are ways that I work through restructuring my mindset and, just working through some emotional deficits and mental health. And so it literally walks you through step by step, stage by stage. And when you do the work, because there's a workbook that comes along with it, there's activities that come along with it. When you actually do it, it'll help you to figure out, okay, what is next for me for my mental health. I like to say it's a tool in your toolkit on your journey towards wellness. Maybe you're not ready to take the step for therapy, but it can serve as a therapeutic tool for you. So that's out there. If you follow me on social media, I'm always jumping on and giving resources. And I actually have a women's conference coming up on April 27th, and it's going to be at Rowan College at Burlington County and Mount Laurel. And so I'm super excited. I'm partnering with some organizations, some major organizations. And our theme this year actually is self-ish. So it's all self-care themed. And we're actually going to be talking about the different areas of self-care in order to help women to embrace those areas of their lives. So all of that information to register for that, to get my book, it all can be found on my website.
Thank you so much, Chanel. Thank you so much for joining Personality Speaking. I am also having a workshop, and that is on February the 3rd from 12 to 2. It's a marriage workshop. You guys, you got to get our marriages together. We need to fight for our marriages because I believe marriages are under attack. And I'm so excited to be able to offer this conference. It's Building Forever, Exploring the Personalities for a Stronger Marriage Connection. There's your QR code that you can click on and register. The price is per couple, not individually. So it's very affordable. It's cheaper than a dinner. But I want you to come and get the information so you can have stronger relationships. Thank you guys for joining Personality Speaking. If you like this content, please like, share, subscribe, check or click the notification bell so you can come on live with us every Wednesday evening as we talk about things that will help you build a stronger, healthier relationship through the understanding of the personalities. Remember, we air every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining Personality Speaking and my guest, Chanel McCord. And we wish you a happy new year. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and or happy holidays, depending on what you celebrate. But we hope that you have a happy new year. See you next week, this time at 7 p.m. on Personality Speaking. Good night, everybody.
Good night.